Instead of his wife saying, "Oh, dear John, I'm glad you're okay. Oh, thank God you made it home," she's reported to have said, "I told you not to go there, you old coot. Now look what happened. You got shot."
Today we have Bill Sheffer, and like many of us, Bill is a lifelong student of the American Civil War. All it took was one family trip to Gettysburg during the centennial commemoration of the battle, and young Billy was hooked. Okay, and he is a retired bank loan officer who made no secret of his interest in the Civil War. His office decor was the Civil War mini museum featuring artifacts, historical photos, shipping cannon models and things like that. He's currently a GAR museum volunteer and a board member, and we're very happy to have him today. He's going to do a talk called Civil War Travel, Trails, and Travails. So, Bill, if there's anything else you'd like to add, and I'll just go ahead and let you take it away.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here today. It's going to be a little bit different than some of our other Zooms, so it's not going to be any statistics or battle talk or things like that, or which battle was more important or which general was better. It's going to be a little more lighthearted, so to speak, with some basically a fun talk about to share my experiences, encounters, and some observations that I've found kind of humorous or interesting over the years. And so again, you don't have to worry about taking any notes. There's not going to be a quiz or a test afterwards. So let's sit back, relax, and enjoy what I call the confessions of a Civil War geek, or another way to look at it is a nerd's eye view of the Civil War. Now, first of all, I'm going to give you a disclaimer here. The opinions expressed here are those of me, the speaker, not of the GAR. So if you hear something and you think, boy, that guy's an idiot, that's me. That's not the GAR speaking, okay? So don't cancel your membership just because maybe I say something you disagree with. Brian said, I start out early, get with an interest in Civil War, and you wonder how many of us got interested in this in the first place. One thing I remember is getting the Sears Christmas catalog and going to the toy section and seeing all the little toy soldier sets. And they had the American Revolution, they had the World War II, and the Alamo, which was pretty cool. But the one that really caught my eye was the blue and the gray soldiers set. And lo and behold, one Christmas morning under the tree, Santa had brought me the blue and gray soldiers kit. And I think I spent many, many hours playing with that and enjoying that. And that's sort of one of the early memories I have. And then in elementary school, in the library, we had this book, which many of you may already have. And I know we have a copy at the museum, the Civil War, the American Heritage book, The Civil War. And if you've seen this book, you very much remember these awesome drawings or paintings that were included in the book. This is, I think, of the the Spotsylvania battlefield. But this really held my attention. I was just fascinated by these pictures. What's interesting, I think I'm not the only one that was fascinated and remembers these, because the Battlefield Trust recently announced that they've commissioned an artist to do something about the Gaines's Mills battlefield from the peninsula in 1862. And I guess they're using that as a promotion and an incentive for people to donate to their preservation cause for the Gaines's Mill battlefield. So, and I saw I guess the initial rendition of this for the Gaines's Mill drawing and art. And it very much the same exact style as what we're looking at here. So that was one of the early things. And then we went out to Gettysburg in 1963 was the 100th anniversary. There's little Billy there on the left, hamming it up, of course, and my sister June. And that's at the Cemetery Ridge high water mark right there, the stone. I believe that must be the General Meade statue in the background, if I had to guess. And there's another one from that trip. And again, I was hooked, and the other thing in middle school, there was really an amazing, memorable experience I had. Our guidance counselor was Robert Gormley, and some of you may know him because he was very active in the Bucks County Civil War organization and roundtable and museum, I believe. Well, anyway, he brought all to the junior high where I was attending, all these artifacts and relics that many he dug up using his metal detector on various battlefields. And just really myself and another student, a friend of mine named Paul, we were both probably more interested than any of the other students. And that summer, during the summer break, Mr. Gormley and his co-counselor, one of his colleagues who was another counselor, they took us out to Antietam, and it was this really hot, hot day. It must have been 95 to 100 degrees. And we were out there on the Rohrbach farm, which is behind the Burnside Bridge, which really was known as the Rohrbach Bridge until General Burnside used it to during the battle. But anyway, we're on this private property where he had permission to dig and excavate. And I managed to dig up these three mini balls, or I'm told now it's pronounced Minier balls, because these projectiles were named after an inventor from France named Minier. So if anybody calls it a mini ball, technically I believe it's Minier. I still have these, and these were once on display in my office, as Brian mentioned, my little mini museum of Civil War stuff. And the other thing I remember from that trip out there on that very hot day, Paul and I guess being 12, 13-year-olds, whatever, typical kids, were whining, "Oh, it's so hot, Mr. Gormley, can we stop?" And we drove like 3 hours to get there. And we maybe after like an hour of excavating and metal detecting found some bullets, but we were just too hot. And we said, "Can we quit?" And they said, "Okay." And I always felt guilty, think, boy, we drove all the way out there and we made them quit after an hour. But now that I'm older, I think they didn't argue. They were just as happy to quit and get out of the hot sun as we were. So here's some of the other doodads and stuff I had in my office, as my mini museum, we call it. And it's now here in the office where I'm speaking today. Monitor. I did not build that. That just came like that. I was not a kid or anything. And this, my daughter gave me the Mr. Bill statue, or a figurine. You remember from Saturday Night Live, Mr. Bill, and oh no. So I thought, well, I should tie in my Civil War interest with Mr. Bill and me being Bill. So, and then this is something interesting. My wife got this gift as a gift for me. It's a Confederate Treasury bill. Now, if you've ever bought e-bonds or a Treasury bill or Treasury note, you realize you're investing in the government. Now, this is a Confederate instrument of financial instrument, and basically is $1,000 item, and basically represents that somebody in the South invested $1,000 in the Confederate cause. And it was a 20-year issue. So in 1863, when this was issued, they were going to get paid interest at 6%, which is a pretty good rate, especially by today's standards, on an investment. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you clip a coupon. And that's how you redeem it. You can either get cotton, believe it or not. Cotton was a commodity and the equivalent to cash and interchange. So you could either get your $60 worth of cotton or $60 in cash. And over the next 20 years, the owner of this Confederate bond would get his return on any investment. Well, as we all know, the Confederacy did not make it to 1860 or 1883, 20 years. In fact, you can see the guy only got to clip one coupon before the Confederacy was bankrupt and insolvent. So basically, he bet on the wrong team. So he did not get a return on his investment. And by the way, that $1,000 back in 1863, I think roughly from what I understand would be around $30,000 today. So that was a big chunk of change to invest in the Confederate cause, and for naught. Now, and here's the other thing. I also, when people find out I'm a Civil War buff, they say, "Oh, do you reenact?" And I go, "Heck no." I'm like this guy in the picture here. I just could never picture myself marching around in a hot wool uniform on a hot summer day, loaded with 30, 40,000 pounds or 30 or 40 pounds of gear on my back. I mean, I have tremendous respect for the people that do reenact, because that's just an amazing thing that I could not do. And I give them all the credit in the world. Again, that's the number one question I get probably when I tell them I am interested in the Civil War. But the other thing I do is I take photographs. I took a course on photography back in the mid 80s. So I went around to a lot of Civil War reenactments and took a bunch of pictures. And this was back before digital. So when you took pictures and they didn't turn out, well, that was just wasted money on film and developing. You couldn't just delete it and, move on. So I took hundreds of pictures at the Civil War reenactments, and this one here is my favorite. I took this at the Neshaminy State Park reenactment. I believe the Del Val Roundtable was one of the sponsors of that and promoters. So this is one of three pictures I gave to one of my clients at the bank. He had an art store and he was an artist himself. So I said, hey, Roger, can you get these matted and framed for me? And he looked at the first two and said, oh, yeah, these are great. Then he looked at this one and then he said, what do you want me to do about the guy with the movie camera in the middle? What? What movie camera? He said, look closely. I go, oh, dang. In the middle of this picture was a guy with a movie camera about the size of your laptop on his shoulder back in the day when you had this big movie camera. And he goes, oh, don't worry, don't worry. I'll just airbrush him out. So I challenge you to find a guy in this picture that you're looking at, a guy with a movie camera. He's in there somewhere, but I bet you can't find him because Roger did a great job of covering it up with smoke. Now, I think many of us are lucky to have a spouse who's also interested in the Civil War. Not so much in my case. My wife is more into Star Trek and science fiction stuff. So a few years back when my daughter was about maybe 12 or so years old, I said, let's go to Gettysburg. And we kind of negotiated a deal. We made a stop at Hershey Park. So in order to get them to go to Gettysburg, I had to say, all right, we'll do a day at Hershey Park. And I'm not a rides person. And it was a rainy, misty, crummy day. And I rode maybe a couple of the easy rides and spent the rest of the day waiting for them, holding their purses, I guess. And meantime, I remember buying three ponchos, Hershey Park ponchos, for $12. Now, this was like 15 years ago. I can't imagine what they're charging for a poncho today. That was the rainy day price, I guess. So, but we did go to Gettysburg and had a good time. Now, my daughter, rather, and I went to another reenactment up in Doylestown one time. And I was hoping to maybe get her interested in the history or the battles or the soldier's life or whatever. She was having none of that. She was interested in the medical tent. So this is a picture from Appomattox 160 last year, but it was typical. This is just like the tent that she was just fascinated by. And she was like asking these guys, the doctor reenactors numerous questions. So now, actually, as it turns out, my daughter's a veterinarian. So whenever I run into a fellow like this guy here or any of the reenactors who have like a medical tent or give a talk on the medical field of the Civil War, I tell them, when you get a young kid who's talking to you or seems interested, you never know. You might be talking to a future doctor. So what you tell them and say to them could be very influential. So don't just like blow them off. Yeah, kid, you're bothering me. You never know what you might be doing to change that kid's life. Now, this is an interesting thing. We had a Civil War roundtable in Levittown back in the 90s, I guess it was. And I think Andy Waskey, our board member from the GAR, was a speaker one time because he always portrays General Meade. I recall he was one of our speakers. And we found out, there's going to be the Civil War conference at Princeton University. So my friend George from the roundtable and I decided, hey, let's go. That sounds like it's going to be interesting. They've got an all-star lineup of speakers. And I have to tell you, George is somewhat of a conservative, traditional man, you might say, a man's man. So we go to register and say, well, okay, now where do we go? He said, well, go out the door, turn left, go over the walkway, and it's the second auditorium lecture hall on the right. Well, apparently the Civil War Conference wasn't the only event that day at Princeton University, because as George and I were approaching that walkway, there was a great big banner that said, welcome, Gay and Lesbian Symposium. Well, George, again, being the conservative kind of guy he was, he says, I hope nobody sees us walking under this tent. So thinking back, if I'd been really quicker on my feet and thinking, I should have put my arm around him and go, hey, George, good to see, we're going to the symposium. He would have probably punched me. Well, anyway, we get into the auditorium in the lecture hall, which is beautiful, a classic, Ivy League lecture hall you can picture. And as I said, it was an all-star cast. Here in the upper left-hand corner, Pulitzer Prize winning author James McPherson. Upper right, Ed Bars. You know Ed Bars from the Ken Burns Civil War series, probably. In the bottom left was Brian Pohanka. You might have seen him in the Gettysburg movie. He's a well-respected author and a historian, the late Brian Pohanka. And on the bottom right, that's Dennis Fry, very instrumental in the preservation of the land at Antietam. And so the moderator is beginning the program by saying, well, today we're going to have so-and-so talk about this, and Ed Bars is going to talk about General Stonewall Jackson in the Shenandoah Valley, and so-and-so. And I nudged George, again, my conservative, traditional buddy. I go, hey, George, I'll give you $20 to stand up and say, isn't this the gay and lesbian symposium? And George was very quick. He said, you don't have enough money to get me to say that. Now, let's move on to Gettysburg. I know everyone here has probably been to Gettysburg multiple times, probably. And if you haven't been to the newest attraction there, I recommend it. It's the Adams County Historical Society Museum. They call it the Beyond the Battle Museum. It's really amazing. And look how big their building is. It's like a monstrous building. I'm impressed. I thought they must have had an awful lot of bake sales and car washes or a couple very big benefactors to pay for that building, or it took a long time, but it's excellent. And it's not just the battle. That's why they say it's beyond the battle. They go from the early days, in fact, the geological era, and they show the rock formations and stuff that were there in Adams County, which is where Gettysburg is, all the way up to today's modern history. But I think the coolest thing is, I guess you call it a four-dimensional experience. This is a room where you sit in and you're there for about 5 or so minutes, and it's supposed to, and it does, it recreates the experience of a family living in downtown Gettysburg during the first day's battle, when there was a lot of street fighting and bombarding and bullets flying all over the place. The room shakes. The sound is like overpowering almost, and there's audio of the family members just sounding petrified. And I've been to the museum a few times, and each time I go, I do this because every time it's just such a great experience. So if you haven't been to that, check it out. And it's only about a mile outside of town, so worth going to, the Adams County Historical Society Museum. And when I was there most recently, this fellow, Tim Smith, who you might recognize from YouTube or some other videos, he's the official historian of Adams County. And he gave a talk on John Burns, the quote unquote hero of Gettysburg. You may already know this story, but Tim Smith wrote a book about it. And it's an interesting story because he's alleged to be the only civilian from Gettysburg who went out and fought that day alongside the Union troops. Now, in his book, it's very well balanced because he reports that there are various units that say, oh, yeah, he fought with us, but there's a dispute and disagreement as to what unit he fought with, where he fought that day, how many times he was wounded. According to Tim Smith's book, John Burns was wounded 1 time, 3 times, 5 times. The story varies, but what they do agree on is that he crawled home the next day on July 2nd, the second day of the battle, crawled home, went into his house, and instead of his wife saying, oh, dear John, I'm glad you're okay. Oh, thank God you made it home. She's reported to have said, I told you not to go there, you old coot. Now look what happened. You got shot. So, and the other thing about John Burns is that Tim Smith wrapped up his talk with this little interesting story. Tim mentioned that he was on the board, and I believe the president of the Evergreen Cemetery in Gettysburg, and he happened to notice that the plot next to John Burns was vacant and open. And he said, so I bought it. So when I die, I'm going to be buried next to John Burns. And Tim Smith said, I don't think John Burns would object, considering, hey, I'm his biographer. And also at the Adams County Historical Society or whatever, a museum, I met this fellow. He's the executive director of the museum. It's Andrew Dalton. And at the time, I guess 2 years ago, he mentioned that he was 26 years old, and he gave a talk about his book and the fighting that went on near Willoughby's Run. Turns out Andrew grew up right on the nearby property, and as a kid rode his bike all over the property and knew it like every square inch. So I thought, you know what? I'll go to the museum store downstairs. I'll buy the book. I'll get him to autograph it. That'll be cool. And while waiting in line, I'm looking at the book, and I look at the inside pages, and I figured out, wait a minute. He had this book published when? And I said, Andrew, you would have been 16, 17 years old when you wrote this book. And he goes, yeah, very modestly. So, wow, I'm thinking that's pretty impressive. When I was like 16, 17 years old, I was not writing books. So, and here is the Beyond the Run book. He wrote a very good, interesting book. A lot of interesting things happened on that property. It was a golf course. It was a mineral springs where people came to buy water and think that all their ills would be cured. So that again, the Battlefield Museum is really interesting. Now, speaking of books, Tom Donnelly from the GAR and I were talking the other week. How many books have been written about Gettysburg? Now, I know I said in the beginning there wasn't going to be any test or a quiz, but this is more of a rhetorical question. Think for a second. How many books do you think have been written about Gettysburg? I know a lot, right? Somewhere between 10 and a million. Well, I looked on Google. It says there are about 65,000 books written about the Civil War, and about half of those are about Gettysburg. So that would put that number at about 30,000 books just about Gettysburg. And I know we have a lot at the GAR Museum, but not 30,000. So Tom and I were kind of like tongue in cheek, joking and being sarcastic, but like, gee, maybe someone's going to write a book about what General Meade had for breakfast at Gettysburg. And so, I thought, yeah, we could do a whole book on just what he had for breakfast. Did he have eggs? Were they sunny side up? Or were they over easy? Or, gee, maybe he had an omelet. Wow, was it a Western omelet or a mushroom omelet? Like, where do you stop with all these books about one battle? I know it was a 3-day battle and it was obviously significant, but like, what hasn't been said already? Then when you talk about Gettysburg, of course, the ghosts come up. That's the other number 2 question people ask me. If they find out that I've been to Gettysburg, they say, ooh, have you seen any ghosts? And I always go, oh, yeah, sure, they're everywhere. I saw one in McDonald's. I saw one in the cemetery. I saw one in the men's room. They're everywhere. And so I'm sort of a skeptic, let's put it that way. But it's a cottage industry. I think it began with a series of books about the ghosts of Gettysburg. And by my count, last time I looked, there's 8 or 9 different companies, outfits running tours for ghost tours. And I think I mentioned that my wife is not a big Civil War buff and traveler. So my friend Tom, his wife is not into it either. So he and I go to Gettysburg and Antietam and Virginia from time to time. And so he and I were out there on a Oh, I'm jumping ahead. All right, I'm going to tell you more about Tom later because he comes up a little bit later. This is the Sachs Ford Bridge, alleged to be the most haunted place in Gettysburg. And we had a visitor at the museum about 3, 4 months ago, and he told me he was out at this location and he thought he saw something that was like a ghostly apparition type experience. So maybe, maybe not. So I've never been to this spot on the battlefield area. So I'll have to make a note to next time I'm at Gettysburg, visit that spot. There you go. Now, here you go. I was telling you about my friend Tom. We were in Gettysburg on a Friday night or a Saturday night, and it was that's when all the ghost tour businesses like come to life. And we're walking down, I guess it's Steinwehr Avenue, the main business district. And a young lady working for one of these ghost tour places, dressed in a period costume, just like this, approached Tom and me, and she said, "Hey, are you fellows looking for a good time?" And we went, "Oh, No, thanks. We're good. And I thought, my daughter was about the same age as that young lady who's asking us that. And I wouldn't want my daughter walking up to a bunch of strange guys saying that. That struck me as quite pushy or quite unusual. Now, this is the other thing. When people ask me, have you seen ghosts? I'm going to say this. You can see me? That ought to shake him up, I hope. We'll see. Now, I mentioned Tom, and first time we went to Gettysburg, we stayed in a motel. I think it was the Wyndham, the one that was a real good Wyndham with a cannon in the lobby and oil paintings of Meade and Lee on the walls. So we're getting ready for bed that night, and I said, Tom, I have to warn you, my wife tells me that I snore. He goes, oh, that's okay. I think I snore too. Then I said, another thing, I sometimes I sleepwalk. And then I said to him, and oh, one third thing, another thing, Tom, I snore, I know, I sleepwalk, and I sometimes, or this tonight, I sleep in the nude. So I think I shocked him. There's Tom, because when I told him I sleep in the nude and I sleepwalk, I looked up the next morning, I looked over to his bed and it was untouched. So So I got a shower, went down, and got dressed and went down. There he's in the lobby reading the brochures that they have for the various things in Gettysburg area. And I said, what's the matter? He said, I couldn't sleep. I said, was it something I said? So I felt bad. I think maybe by saying that, making that silly story up, I made him unable to sleep. Now I've got to throw in the bad dad joke here because I just can't stop myself. The old joke is, why do you have to sit at the counter when you go to the Lincoln Diner? That's because they have no booths. But sorry about that, but I had to tell you that. There's another one I find interesting here. The General Pickett's buffets. Now, fortunately, the Battlefield Trust raised money and they bought the property and they tore it down, or I think they're in the process of tearing it down now, and they're going to restore that piece of ground to the way it looked, just bare field, so that the line of sight of the battlefield for Pickett's charge is unimpeded. I think it's interesting too that the General Pickett's buffet still exists. It lives on. It retreated south, you might say, to a southern part of the town. So it still exists. So if you're looking for General Pickett's buffet, just head a little farther south when you're in Gettysburg. Now I'm going to give you another one here. I thought this was kind of funny. Lee's Buffet. The other Lee, not the Lee we think of when we think of Gettysburg. Now, I'm going to give you a reminder of the disclaimer. The things that I say are my opinion. So if you think they're crazy or wacky or wrong, that's fine. Don't blame the GAR. Just blame me. You can send me the nasty letters or whatever. I was in a store shopping for a flag and some other stuff on Steinmore Avenue, one of the souvenir shops. And as I was waiting in line, the guy at the counter, I believe was the store owner, was talking to the shopper ahead of me. And he's saying, oh, the Civil War was not about slavery. It was all about states' rights. And the shopper, I don't think he really was a student of the war from his reaction. He was going, oh, okay. Huh. And it was going on and on. And finally, me and my big mouth, of course, I have to say something. I go, oh, brother, please. I said to the shopper, don't listen to that guy. He's so full of it. I go, states' rights. Well, what's states' rights? Well, I know now better to have a little bit more argument rather than, oh, yeah. Because I've read the Confederate Constitution. I've read this terrific book, The Myth of the Lost Cause by Edward Bonekemper. He was an attorney slash historian who's recently passed away, but this is a terrific book. It explains so much, including the fact that of the 11 Confederate states, 10 included verbiage about slavery in their Declaration of Independence and secession. They specifically said the reason they're leaving the Union was over the issue of slavery. So to just say it's about states' rights is like silly. It's like not very accurate. And if you read the Confederate Constitution, you'll see that it explicitly protects slavery, and it even prohibits the banning of slavery. So, for example, if Florida wanted to say, hey, we'll pick our own oranges, we don't want slavery anymore, we'll abolish slavery, that would be unconstitutional according to the Confederate Constitution. So when they tell you it's all about states' rights, that's the myth of the lost cause. Okay. Now I have to confess, I am a word nerd. Certain things bother me, and in the realm of Civil War verbiage and language, the word cavalry bothers me. You may notice, or at least I always notice, when someone's narrating a documentary or giving a lecture or a podcast, and they mispronounce it. They'll say Calvary. It's not cavalry, it's cavalry, like a cavalier, the Cleveland Cavaliers basketball team. They're not the Cavaliers. Calvary is where Jesus was crucified. Cavalry is a horse soldier. So that's one of those things that bugs me. And speaking of cavalry, a couple of years back, they had a terrific reenactment at Gettysburg. Not often you see this many people on horseback. And in fact, if I was going to reenact, it would be cavalry. But someone would have to buy me a horse, take care of the horse, groom it, transport it, and all that. So I don't think that's ever going to happen. But if I was going to do cavalry or a reenactment, it would be cavalry. And you probably may already know this, but the way the cavalry fought was they worked in groups of four. One guy would stay back and hold the horses while the other three would go on foot, fight and fight. And most of the fighting was on foot, not horseback like you might see on TV or in movies with the swords, swashbuckling and all. It was a little simpler than that. And then we have this. See if this works. There we go. Now, the most impressive thing about that was playing bugle and riding on a bouncing horse. Because in high school, I played trumpet in the band, and I don't know if I could have played it while bouncing up and down on a horse. And speaking of bouncing and being on a horse, here I am. One of the ways that I've toured the Gettysburg battlefield, either on foot, car, by bus, bicycle, and there's on my horse, not my horse, but the horse I rode that day, Grace. Now, this brings us up to another thing. This may be why you're interested in the Civil War. I imagine a lot of our people in the Zoom today have ancestors in the Civil War. And it turns out I have a couple, it turns out, with some research. I have two cavalry ancestors, I guess you might say. One in the 4th PA Cavalry. He was not at Gettysburg because he hadn't enlisted until 1864, but I thought it was kind of cool. Here's his monument from his troops, some of his buddies, I guess he got to meet later. And the other ancestor I have was in the 16th PA Cavalry that fought on the East battlefield against Jeb Stuart. Now, the interesting thing is the Pennsylvania monument at Gettysburg allegedly and reportedly has engravings of every soldier from Pennsylvania who fought at Gettysburg. Now, I looked for my ancestor's name, Oliver Board, and did not see it. I thought, well, maybe I missed it. Well, the other week, we had a professional genealogist come to the museum to do some research, and we got to talking. And one of the things she was looking at was the mystery of missing names on the monument. And she explained to me that, well, it could have been a couple of things. It could have been a clerical error, maybe when they were taking roll call during the battle, my ancestor wasn't there. Maybe he was on sick leave, and that's why he wasn't there. And there's another option, she said, maybe he was a deserter. So that's interesting to think about. Was my ancestor from the 16th PA Cavalry a deserter? Didn't say anything about that in his obituary, which our buddy Walt Lafty found for me when he did some research. But you never know. Now, a few years back, my wife and I were having dinner with another couple, and in the course of the dinner, the man said, I'm related to Abraham Lincoln. And as he said that, the waitress walking by, she stuck her head in and said, "I'm related to John Wilkes Booth." And we went like, wow, holy smokes, what are the odds of that? That's pretty bizarre. Well, I mentioned the story to Herb Kaufman, who's the expert on Abraham Lincoln, probably in the Delaware Valley. And he said, no, 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 your friend could not be related to Abraham Lincoln because Abraham Lincoln did not have any direct descendants. His only surviving son, Robert, had no children. So I think, well, maybe my friend was confused. Maybe he was related to Abraham Lincoln's wife or a cousin or something like that. But you just never know. Now, I do know people. In fact, my friend Tom, who we've mentioned before, he says he's related to Alexander Stephens, the fellow on the left. He was the vice president of the Confederacy from Georgia. And I'm pretty sure his accuracy in genealogy is correct. Now, I also know someone who said their husband was related to General James Longstreet, there in the middle. And Tom and I have a friend who says he was related to Ambrose Burnside, the general from the Union Army. Well, I ran into this fellow at the Gettysburg, and he's the man who portrays General Burnside. And I mentioned, oh, I have a friend who's related to Burnside. In fact, his middle name is Burnside. And just like Herb Kaufman told me the story about Lincoln, this man said, Burnside didn't have any children, so your friend could not be a direct descendant. So again, maybe someone was related to a brother or a sister, but the fact that his middle name was Burnside seems kind of odd that it would not be accurate, you know? Now, if you don't have the opportunity to drive or fly to South Carolina to see Fort Sumter, maybe the next best thing you could do is take a little drive down to Delaware and visit Fort Delaware, located on Pea Patch Island in Delaware. You take a ferry from the whatever side you're coming, Pennsy or Jersey, and you go to the fort. And it's really neat. You wouldn't know much different other than the fact that this has not been bombarded the way Fort Sumter was, but it's a pretty cool visit. And what I thought was interesting, and again, I have utmost respect for reenactors, but I have to say the people portraying Confederate prisoners probably were like, had the easiest job, you might say, of being a reenactor because their whole job was to sit there in their ragged, dirty butternut uniform and pretend to be a prisoner. They more or less just sat there chewing on a corncob pipe. And they didn't have to tote any equipment around, didn't have to like march. And so it's sort of, I might say, the lazy man's reenacting, you might say. But again, it's they're out there doing their thing. And on the way back, actually, this was interesting. You take a ferry back and forth. The fellow who was the commandant or the commander of the fort was giving the tour. He was the docent, the tour guide. And he was cool. Had this really resplendent uniform with gold braid, and he looked really sharp. And I was talking to him on the ferry ride back, and I'd said, gee, I read in Civil War Times that there's going to be a book about Fort Delaware coming out soon. And he goes, no, I wrote it. That's my book. Now, I don't know whether that's ever come out because he mentioned there was some kind of negotiating and haggling and discussions going back and forth with the publisher. Now, we do have a book on Fort Delaware in the museum library, which I'm currently reading, but I don't think, we don't have this fellow's book. So I know it's not his. And speaking of books in the library, just want to remind you, if you're a member of the GAR, one of your benefits is that you're allowed to take books out of the library for 3 weeks and bring it back and sign it out and bring it back. So that's a real nice benefit. I've told my family, don't buy me any more Civil War books. I've got too many that I'll never be able to read here at the museum. And another fort that's an even closer ride for most of us probably is Fort Mifflin. Now, generally speaking, most people think of this as a Revolutionary War site and fort. It was built to prevent the British from sailing up the Delaware River and capturing Philadelphia. And that worked for a while, but ultimately the British captured the fort and did capture Philadelphia. But during the Civil War, just like Fort Delaware, the fort was used for holding Confederate prisoners, Union deserters and also for holding political prisoners. And it's a really interesting place. But the sad thing about it, I have to say, is that it's right within like the line of sight pretty much of the Philadelphia airport. And the day my buddy Tom and I were there, the docent, this young fellow who was a Temple University history major, he was giving a terrific talk. It was very interesting, but he had to stop every couple of minutes because of the flight of the airplanes taking off and landing. They were so noisy, he couldn't be heard over the sound of the airplane. And also, it's what's built up around the Fort Mifflin there is all this industrial area. So it's kind of a shame that the surrounding neighborhood hasn't been preserved. But it's kind of a unique little place, not far from where we live. So check it out if you haven't been to Fort Mifflin. I mentioned the Civil War Trust. It's one of my favorite charities besides the GAR. As you know, they buy and preserve battlefields. Now they're saving not just Civil War battlefields, but they're preserving War of 1812 battlefields and American Revolutionary War battlefields. Now, this is the time a few years back when they unveiled and had the ribbon cutting ceremony for Lee's headquarters at Gettysburg on the Chambersburg Pike. And it was a big event, nice event. They had reenactors from both sides, and even celebrity reenactors were there. There's General Lee. So he showed up for his headquarters. Now, the Civil War Trust does some cool tours. I've gone to this Brandy Station tour with Dan Davis there. Mainly, that was mainly because of my interest in the cavalry. The Brandy Station battle, the Battle of Brandy Station, was the biggest cavalry battle. It's almost said the wrong thing. Biggest cavalry battle in North America. And there's Chris White, who gave a terrific tour about Chancellorsville. And you know what? I thought I understood the Battle of Chancellorsville and the logistics and the layout. But boy, after walking the battlefield with Chris White and the other people, it's pretty confusing. Like, wow. It's hard to keep your bearings. There's Sarah K. Bearley. She's also one of the Battlefield Trust people. She gave a tour of the Burnside Bridge at Antietam, also known as the Rohrbach Bridge. One of the things I did the first time I went to visit the Burnside Bridge, I was trying to imagine what it was like for the Union soldiers trying to cross that bridge while they were under fire from 400 Georgia infantrymen. And it was a pretty scary thing. And I was a little younger then and a little faster, but it still took me about 15 seconds to jog across that bridge. And I'm trying to imagine what that would have been like, having bullets flying at me and them trying to kill me while I was running across that bridge and then trying to run up a hill at the Georgians. Now, if you've never been to Gettysburg for Remembrance Day, it's a pretty cool event. It's a big event. I know Walt and you reenactors have been out there, and it's very impressive. It's a long march they take. And my buddy Tom and I went out 2 years ago, and we were parked by the McDonald's there on Emmitsburg Road, very much near the end of the parade. Different units marching. Again, it's a long walk and a busy day for these guys. And here's the ladies of the Grand Army of the Republic. There we are. A lot of groups were represented. They came by horse, they came by wagon, by carriage, by foot. Even Abraham Lincoln made it. Of course, it was his day, Remembrance Day. And the Remembrance Day, if you don't know, was to mark the anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And speaking of Gettysburg, there's always another controversy whether it's pronounced Gettysburg or Gettysburg. Some people say, well, the town was named after James Geddes, so it should be Gettysburg, not Gettysburg. Then I've heard some different narrators and people historians, they go back and forth. So I don't think that's ever been settled. Another disclaimer here. These opinions are from me, not from the GAR. So here they are. I said the silver medalists, and I said that on the Union soldiers who had done marching and were watching the parade in my with an earshot. They chuckled. They thought that was pretty funny, you know. But my friend Tom said, "Be careful. Those guys have bayonets." I said, "Okay, yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right." Went to Virginia, Winchester, Virginia. Just head to Harrisburg before you get to Gettysburg, whatever. Hang a left. I think you go down Route 81. It's not far, and it's a great town where the town itself had changed hands more than 70 times, as they say. And they have a tour of Stonewall Jackson's headquarters. And while there, the woman who was the docent, she was like a Southern belle in the period costume, probably about 60, 70 years old. But she looked at me and I was wearing this shirt, my Gettysburg shirt. And I don't think she liked that. She gave me a dirty look, like, Yankee. Well, then during her talk, she started going into the myth of the lost cause arguments, like, oh, this and that. And then she finally said, sometimes you just have to fight for your rights. Well, that's when I couldn't take it anymore. And I said, "Oh, you mean your right to keep slaves, huh?" That's when she looked at my shirt and me again. That's when she gave me the damn Yankee look. Now, also in Winchester, I did a horseback trip. And it turns out I was the only guest that day. And the guy took me out anyway, the owner of the ranch. And I said, "I'm curious. Your brochure said that we're going to be traveling over the various routes and paths that were traveled by the Confederate and Union cavalry scouts and troops. Where would that be?" He says, "Well, I had to confess, I'm not really sure. I just put that in the brochure because it sounded good, and I figured that the soldiers were all over this area. So just by accident, we have to be going over some of the trails that they were on." So I said, "Okay, I don't mind. That's fine. I'm having fun anyway." But he told me that the biggest tip he ever got was after the ride. The tourist said, "Sir, I really enjoyed the stories you told. They were terrific." And he said to the guy, he says, "Well, I have to confess, sir, I made a lot of those stories up." And the man said, "Oh, I know you made them up. I'm a history professor. I know that was all BS. I just enjoyed how creative you were." So that gave me an idea. I give tours at the museum every now and then, and we have this chair, which no one has really told me who it belonged to. We think it was part of maybe a GAR post or something, but it's got the poster there for the wanted poster for the assassins of Abraham Lincoln. So just to be funny and different, I've started telling people that's the chair that Abraham Lincoln was sitting in when he was assassinated. And I get one of two reactions. One half of the people, they go, "Oh, no way. No, I don't believe you." And the other half go, "Wow, that's the chair Lincoln was in." And I always say, "Nah, I made that up. I'm kidding. I just made that up." So, but I have a little fun with that. Another thing down in Winchester is the North-South Skirmish Association. If you get to go to their annual or their periodic shoot off, they have a competition where they fire at targets. You can see here. And these guys are amazingly accurate. And the noise and the sound, if you want to imagine what the battle was like, if you've never been in combat, to get you there close to really what it was like. And again, their accuracy was most amazing. This mortar kind of cannon, um, they were shooting at a target 100 yards away, and it was like a flag, a plexiglass flag like you'd see on a golf course. And this one team, they actually hit the flag. The shot went up like a fly ball, like in baseball, or a chip shot in golf. It landed and hit the flag. I mean, if they didn't win, I don't they were cheated, because that was an amazing shot. And I even do the shooting at night. Now, this is a really good photograph. I can't claim that I took this shot. This is off of the North South Skirmish Association webpage or Facebook page. Now, there's many ways to travel and tour. And my ex-wife, my first wife, and I did a battlefield tour with a company called Bike Virginia, and we toured the battlefields of Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, and also Chancellorsville. Well, in our group, it was a small group of about 15 people. There was two young ladies. I think they were sisters. And I guess you would call them Stonewall Jackson fangirls or groupies, you might say, but they were really big on Stonewall Jackson. And at that dinner after the first 44-mile bike ride that day, they said, hey, we're going to go out and find Stonewall Jackson's arm and where it's buried. We talked to one of the park rangers and he gave us an idea how to find it. So my ex and I, we go, oh, no, no, we're too tired. You go ahead. But what we did instead was we followed them out. We gave them maybe a 1 minute head start and we followed them out and we waited in the woods. And when they came back to their car, we jumped out and gave the rebel yell, like, woo, and scared the heck out of them. In fact, one guy dropped his camera, and I thought, oh, I'm going to have to buy this guy a camera. But turns out it wasn't broken. So here it is. There's Stonewall Jackson's arm, which I believe the story goes, it's been relocated. It hasn't always just been in this one spot. It's a piece of Confederate sacred relic or artifact, you might say. The last year, as we're wrapping this up here, folks, Tom and I went to Appomattox 160, the anniversary of the Lee surrender to General Grant. And this is the McLean House. And there's the inside of the McLean House. Now, that's all replica furniture. Most of the furniture, I think, was given away or is taken as souvenirs. But this replicates what the room looked like, the studio, whatever, where Lee surrendered to Grant. And this was the reenactment of the stacking of the arms. The Confederates obviously not looking too happy because they surrendered and are giving up their weapons. It was a great event. It was maybe one of the best reenactments and programs I've ever been to. It was a week-long event, but I was there on Saturday, and they had great lecturers and authors, and this. Now, what's interesting, at the museum, I was talking to one of our guests, and I was telling him about how cool the event was at Appomattox. And he goes, yeah, I'm a reenactor, a Confederate artillery reenactor. And I showed him that video that we just watched, and he says, oh, that's my group. I wasn't there that week, but that's definitely my group. So that's kind of a small coincidence. One of the other things they had at the Appomattox 160 and at the national park there was the printing press that they used to print the paroles that they gave to some 15,000 or so Confederates who had surrendered. And there's more Confederates. They didn't all get paroles because many of them just left. They didn't stick around. So not everyone who was in Lee's army surrendered. Now this is a sample of what the bearer or the soldier would get, his parole. It's kind of like a get out of jail pass so that he could travel back home without being harassed and taken away as a prisoner. At the end of the evening, around 6 o'clock, they reenacted the surrender. In fact, they were filming it for, I guess, some History Channel program or some documentary. So they did it 2, 3 times just to get the best shot. And it was pretty cool. And then, as I always said, I had to make a comment. Again, this is my opinion, but I highly respect the reenactors because they're doing a tough job and under tough conditions, and they spend a lot of money on their equipment and uniforms. The fellow there on the left, bottom left, with the red scarf around his neck, he's portraying George Custer. George Custer was the boy general who, at the time of the surrender, was about 25 years old. This fellow here doing the reenacting is not 25 years old. He's more my age. And he's probably what I think George Custer might have looked like had he survived the Battle of Little Bighorn and lived to be 60, 70 years old. So, but again, God bless him for reenacting. And they wrapped up the event with this 4,000 luminaries, these paper bags with a battery operated candle inside of each bag were lined down the main road running through Appomattox. I forget the name of the road. Some of you might know that. But anyway, why 4,000 bags? Each bag represented a slave that had been freed who lived in Appomattox County and who'd been freed as a result of Lee's surrender to Grant. So that was quite an operation, first of all, to lay out 4,000 bags. And some of them actually had names on them. So, but I'm sure not all the slaves were identified and known. But 4,000 bags, and this is what it looked like lit up. Again, I can't take credit for that picture. That's a beautiful picture. That's from the National Park Service webpage. So I think that's all we have here. So that's all, folks. I thank you for coming out today. I hope you got a chuckle or a smile or picked up something that was interesting. So, Brian, take it away. Back to you.
That was fantastic. I'd like to say a couple things before, if anyone has any questions. I thoroughly enjoyed your spirit of never let the truth get in the way of a good story. You seem to like to capitalize on that quite a bit, and I like what you did with that chair at the museum. Um, this was I like this a lot. This was like a every thought you had along the way of your Civil War journey distilled down into I guess it's greatest hits and all. It's like a show
Yeah.
and tell. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I'd like to see more show and tells like this. This is much different. Some of the things I found interesting was the Treasury bill. I I've never seen anything like that where it had tear offs like the old
Mm-hmm.
flyers you would see above a payphone. You need a dog sitter
Oh,
or
yeah, right.
take guitar lessons
Yeah,
kind of thing. So would they accept payment and that would be the tear off is what you would take with you?
correct. Uh-huh.
Okay, so you didn't actually get a certificate. It was like, here's an image of one, but we're going to give you this little receipt. Is that how I'm understanding that
Well,
thing?
to redeem, when I worked in banking, and this is before everything was electronic, our clients would come in, they'd go to their safe deposit box, take out their treasury bill, and they would clip a coupon and stick it in a little window envelope with their name and address and account number. And then the bank, we would send it to the federal treasury to be redeemed. So that was still being done at least through the 90s, I guess, before the government switched everything to be electronic redemptions. So there was
So
that's
almost
that.
like the old car notes where they give you the payment slips and you send them
Yeah,
in. Wow.
yeah,
Okay. Hey.
exactly. And that was the only way to collect your money. Yeah. And if I thought it was interesting that you could convert it into cotton. So in that
Yeah.
case,
Very
as I
interesting.
said, the guy bet on the wrong team. He only got to collect his $60 and that was it. He lost.
Now the medical tent. That was interesting to see how these people they're making an impact with planting
Yeah.
seeds, and
Hmm.
how it you know did you ever talk to your daughter to see how much that shaped her wanting to be a veterinarian?
I never did. I should ask her about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it had something to do with it,
I'm
or
sure
at
it
least
had
it was,
something.
or at least it was a sign of things to come. Um,
Right. Yeah.
I also appreciated you bringing up about being a member, which is something we're always trying to drive here. One of the reasons why we do these programs about the books benefit. So I'm
Yeah.
glad I don't mention it, and though probably I should. Maybe we should be mentioning things like that more often. So I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that. I'm glad you brought that up and
Yeah.
how that
We have a
works.
tremendous library. I mean, we have to pretty much categorize and alphabetize them, do some more cataloging, but if you can't find a book to read in there, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, that's true. And and also like I like you pointing out all the things you've done along the way. Sure, a lot of people will be like, "Oh yeah, I know about that. I know about." It. But uh, I've been to Gettysburg probably 16 times, 17 times, something like that as an adult where, I'm conscious. My dad used to take me there when I was a little guy. But and every time I've gone there, I always find there's something to do that I haven't done before. The last one, I went to Culp's Hill. I was never at Culp's Hill. I've been there so many
Huh.
times, but because
Yeah.
I went here and there. The other thing on a bucket list is the Eisenhower House because it's never opened during Remembrance Day. So
Mm.
you showing these things, it's good because there's stuff that you were showing that I've never been to. I've never been to Appomattox. So
Yeah.
so you sharing your journey along the way, it works,
Good.
even
I'm
for people
glad.
who are knee deep in this. So that I appreciated. The Adams County 40 exhibit that you were talking about, which is a fabulous museum. I'll point out to you since you enjoyed that so much. I don't know if you've been to the Heritage Museum. They have something very similar. You're in a
Oh, no.
you're in a basement, and you hear the
Uh-huh.
footsteps running of the soldiers that go into your home, and you're
Oh,
hunkered down.
wow.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
check that out. That's at the Heritage Center. And
You
also,
write
I'm
that
glad you
down.
brought up Remembrance Day. A lot of people
Uh-huh.
don't really know about Remembrance Day. Maybe people in the
Oh.
Philadelphia area do, and that you should be getting your rooms now for that. And you just,
Mm.
you know, uh, look into that because you'll see if you get it last minute, you'll end up in Chambersburg, for a
And
hotel room.
I've
So
done that. Yeah, you know what? And I passed a bunch of motels on the way that said vacancy. I'm
yeah,
like, why am I driving all the way to Chambersburg? Because that's where Travelocity, whatever, put me. I'm thinking that was a ripoff.
yeah, that's true. And Airbnb is a good
Yeah,
hack too. Sachs Bridge, I didn't know that was supposed to be haunted. But I will say,
yeah.
if it is haunted, it's haunted by kids with pocket knives and sharpies because there's every couple that's ever existed carved their name in that bridge, and you'll see when you
Oh,
go there.
okay.
But and I also want to point out a lot of people roll their eyes at ghost tours, and
Uh-huh.
I've done these ghost tours in town, and they're fantastic. Sometimes they'll have the theater actors from the college that will come
Mm,
and work, and they do a beautiful job telling stories about things that actually happen, and they tie in the ghosts. But
yeah,
a lot of people roll their eyes at those ghost tours, but they're fascinating
yeah.
things to and fun things to do. So I wanted to thank you for those things, and I wanted to share one more thing. You were talking about the silver medalists, the Confederates at Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
I said to a friend of mine, General John Howe, because I march in that parade every year, and I said to him, I said, "How do you feel about being in the back? You know, every year, you're stuck in the back." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, that's exactly where we should be, chasing the Yanks through town." And and
Oh,
I said, "That's a good answer. That's a good attitude
it
to have."
is.
Yeah. So, well, there weren't Confederates in the original progression to the cemetery on Remembrance Day,
Mhm.
but they do include them, which is nice to do, and they're
Okay.
usually a rowdy bunch in the parade. Thank you so much. See you at the museum. I'll see you all at the museum and at the next Zoom. God bless everybody. Thank you so much.